What would happen if a person's life were turned upside down in an instant, revealing secrets that would change everything they believed? Sarah, a successful lawyer, lived a quiet life until a tragic car accident took away the love of her life, Paul. This devastating loss left her in a state of despair, and amid her grief, a new pain emerged. She discovered she was pregnant. However, the sadness deepened even further when her child was stillborn. From that moment on, Sarah threw herself into her work as a way to escape the haunting memories. One morning, while waiting at a traffic light, her eyes fixed on a young flower seller named James. What should have been an ordinary scene transformed into a moment of epiphany when she realized that the young man was wearing a watch that belonged to Paul. A wave of curiosity and an inexplicable connection washed over her. Who was that young man? Why did he have Paul's watch? These questions began to swirl in her mind, leading her down a path she never imagined she would take. Determined to understand the origin of that watch, Sarah embarked on an investigation that led her to uncover the dark history of James and his mother, Dolores. The revelation that Dolores had kidnapped Paul, faking his death to keep him away from Sarah, left her stunned. And the most devastating truth: James, the young man she had seen selling flowers, was her son, the one she believed she had lost forever. This discovery not only shattered her reality but also made her question everything she knew about love and family. As Sarah rose from the ashes of pain and betrayal, she found herself in a new conflict: the pursuit of reconciliation with Paul, who had survived and was waiting for a new chance to connect with his family. The story unfolds in an emotional family reunion, where forgiveness and reconciliation challenge the past and make room for a future filled with hope. However, the shadow of Dolores's actions loomed over them, and the struggle for redemption became a matter of emotional survival. In the end, Sarah's journey not only led her to reunite with the loves of her life but also made her reflect on what truly matters. The pursuit of professional success had transformed into a quest for happiness and forgiveness, and in choosing to move forward, she realized that the most valuable lessons in life often come from the most painful experiences. James, in turn, continued to visit Dolores, who would spend her final days immersed in remorse, while the family united in a new beginning, full of love and hope. Sarah was at an emotional crossroads. The discovery that James was her son, the one she had lost, left her disoriented. At the same time, the revelation about Paul, who had been kidnapped by Dolores, left her with a whirlwind of feelings: anger, sadness, and, in a way, hope. The life she knew had been dismantled, and now she found herself forced to rebuild everything from broken pieces. In the days that followed, Sarah began to confront not only the pain of loss but also the complexity of the relationships at play. On one hand, there was Paul, who, after years of suffering and loneliness, was back in her life. On the other hand, James, a young man who had grown up believing he had lost his mother, and who was now struggling to understand his true identity. Sarah felt she needed to protect him, but she also didn't know how to deal with the reality that he was her son, yet also a stranger. Paul, for his part, was determined to reconnect with Sarah and James. He wanted to explain his side of the story, but the task would not be easy. The pain he had endured during all those years, away from his family, had left deep scars. He felt guilty for putting Sarah in such a difficult position and, at the same time, hoped she could forgive him and accept that he still loved her. The pressure on him was immense, and each encounter with Sarah made him feel more vulnerable. Meanwhile, James found himself caught in the middle of this turmoil. He not only had to deal with the revelation of his true parentage but also with the fact that his mother, Dolores, was responsible for so much pain. The relationship between them, which had once been based on love and protection, was now becoming a web of lies and betrayals. James wanted to understand why his mother had done what she did, but he also felt he needed to find his place alongside Sarah and Paul. The confusion and desire for belonging tormented him. Amid this scenario, Sarah began to feel the pressure of her career. The successful lawyer, who had always been admired for her dedication and competence, was now struggling to balance her professional life with the emotional storm she faced. The hours at the office became increasingly long as she tried to distract herself from what was happening in her personal life. But the truth was that the pressure at work was affecting her mental health and her relationships. She began to feel that by hiding in her work, she was distancing herself from Paul and James, and that left her even more distressed. The first major difficulty arose when Sarah had to confront Dolores. A meeting was scheduled at a rehabilitation center where Dolores was interned. Sarah knew she needed to hear from the woman who had caused so much suffering in her life. But at the same time, there was a deep fear inside her. What could Dolores say? Would she have any justification that made sense? The anticipation of meeting the woman who had shaped her destiny left her anxious, and the idea of confronting her challenged her emotionally. On the day of the meeting, Sarah arrived at the rehabilitation center with a racing heart. The room was filled with a strong smell of disinfectant, and the atmosphere was tense. Dolores awaited her, with a lost look and a weary expression. What Sarah did not expect was the fragility she saw in the woman who had been her enemy. Dolores seemed aged, and her voice trembled as she spoke. This made Sarah question whether the woman before her was really the same one who had kidnapped Paul. Dolores's vulnerability contradicted the image she had built in her mind. The conversation began hesitantly but soon turned into an emotional clash. Sarah found herself confronting not only Dolores but also her own beliefs about love, forgiveness, and family. She wanted to understand Dolores's motivations but was also aware that the pain could not simply be erased. The words became weapons, and as they argued, Sarah felt a wave of anger and sadness. She realized that to move forward, she would need to confront not only the ghosts of the past but also the difficult truths surrounding her. By the end of the meeting, Sarah left the rehabilitation center feeling exhausted. The weight of the revelations still oppressed her, and she knew the journey was far from over. It was only the beginning. She needed to find a path that would lead her to healing, not only for herself but also for Paul and James. What was at stake was more than a love story. It was the reconstruction of a family and the quest for a future where pain could be transformed into strength. After the meeting at the rehabilitation center, Sarah felt as if she had crossed a battlefield. Dolores's words still echoed in her mind, and confusion followed her like a shadow. The tension in her chest grew each day, reflecting in her health and her ability to work. She began to notice that she felt constantly tired, struggling to concentrate on the cases she was handling at the office. The accumulated stress was affecting her performance, and the consequences were evident. Meetings that had once been productive now dragged on, and her colleagues started to notice that something was wrong. Paul, on the other hand, was struggling to re-establish himself in Sarah and James's lives. He loved her deeply, but the lack of communication among the three was creating a chasm. After Sarah's meeting with Dolores, Paul hoped she would feel lighter and ready to move forward, but what he saw was a woman who seemed even more distant. He tried to approach her, offer support, but Sarah was so immersed in her own thoughts that she often couldn't hear his words. This left him frustrated and sad, as he wanted to be the anchor Sarah needed but felt powerless. James, in turn, was on an emotional roller coaster. The revelations about his true origins left him confused. He wanted to get closer to Sarah, but the pain she displayed seemed like an insurmountable wall. He wondered if Paul's presence was a threat to the bond he was trying to build with his mother. Meanwhile, the image of his biological mother, Dolores, haunted him. How could someone he had loved and trusted cause so much pain? He began to question whether it was even possible to trust anyone again. The interactions between him and Sarah became increasingly complex and filled with awkward silences. The tension escalated when Paul decided it was time for a serious conversation with James. He knew the young man needed to understand that, despite everything, he was also a part of the new family that was being built. Paul sat down with James in a park, where the weather was mild and the sun was shining. The idea was to create a safe space for them to talk. However, James was distant, his eyes fixed on the ground, unable to face Paul. James raised his head, his eyes shimmering with a mix of anger and sadness. "You don't understand. You don't know what I've been through. And now you're here, acting like everything is fine, but I'm not sure I can trust you." James' words cut Paul like a knife. He realized that even while trying to be a stabilizing force, his presence was a source of pain for the young man. "I understand that you're hurt. I'm hurt too. But we need to find a way to deal with this together." The conversation ended in a deadlock, with James pulling away, leaving Paul wondering if he could truly connect with the son he had lost for so long. Paul's frustration grew, and he felt powerless. It was a cycle that seemed never-ending, and his attempts to reach out to James were only intensifying the pain. Meanwhile, Sarah began to feel the pressure of work again. The office, once a place of achievements, now felt like a prison. The hours dragged on, and tasks piled up. One afternoon, after receiving a call from an unhappy client, she lost her temper and shouted. The scene left her colleagues in shock, and she realized she had crossed a line. Guilt consumed her, and she isolated herself at her desk, questioning her choices. Sarah knew she needed help, but pride prevented her from asking. Days passed, and the feeling of failure began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. The challenges were piling up, and the emotional and physical pressure made her feel like she was sinking. She knew she needed to change, but how? The lessons she had learned from pain were still forming in her mind, and the journey of reconciliation felt further away than ever. In a moment of reflection, Sarah decided she could not continue like this. She could not let pain define her, nor could she distance herself from Paul and James. With a heavy heart, she resolved it was time to confront her fears and seek help. What was at stake was far greater than her personal insecurities. It was the possibility of rebuilding the family she had always wanted. Thus, Sarah began her journey of self-discovery and healing, determined to reconnect not only with Paul and James but also with herself. The difficulties still lay ahead, but she finally felt ready to face whatever came her way. On a sunny day, Sarah decided it was time to take the first step toward her recovery. She had scheduled a new appointment with her therapist, a small act of courage that felt monumental to her. As she entered the office, the familiar scent of lavender and the warm environment enveloped her, and for a moment, she felt safe. However, that feeling was soon replaced by anxiety. What would she say? How would she explain the pain that consumed her? During the session, Sarah began to talk about her struggles, her difficulty in dealing with work, and the tension at home. The therapist listened attentively, asking questions to help her explore her feelings. But soon, something unexpected happened. As she spoke about her relationship with James and Paul, a distant yet vivid memory surfaced in her mind. She recalled a moment from her childhood when she had found an old diary of her mother's. In it, her mother described her own battles with anxiety and feelings of inadequacy. It was as if, through those pages, Sarah had a window into the pain and struggle her mother faced. This revelation deeply shook her. Sarah realized that her mother's story was not just a shadow in her life, but a reflection of what she was experiencing herself. The connection between them became clear. The insecurities and fears she felt were not new. They had been passed down from generation to generation, and now, she was in a struggle to break that cycle. This epiphany made Sarah reconsider her choices. If her mother had fought and fallen, perhaps it was possible to learn from those experiences instead of allowing them to consume her. As she left the appointment, a new determination took hold of her. Sarah decided she could no longer allow fear and insecurity to control her. She needed to confront her shortcomings, not only as a professional but also as a mother and partner. This was an opportunity to start over, to not let the past define her future. What once seemed like an insurmountable mountain now appeared as a path to be walked. However, upon arriving home, reality awaited her. Paul was in the living room, looking worried and tired. He had a difficult day at work and was trying to stay calm, but the tense atmosphere between them was palpable. Sarah knew she needed to be honest about her emotions, but insecurity made her hesitate. She was about to speak when James entered, wearing a look of discontent. He hadn't liked something he heard at school and felt wronged. The tension rose. Paul, trying to mediate, suggested they talk about what was happening, but James' frustration exploded. "Nobody cares about me. I'm alone in this." The young man's words were a desperate cry that echoed in the room, hitting Sarah like an arrow. She realized that while she was wrestling with her own demons, she had left James adrift, without the support he so desperately needed. The weight of guilt piled up inside her, and the sight of her anguished son made her heart even heavier. It was at that moment that Sarah felt she needed to act. She could not allow James to feel abandoned. With a trembling but firm voice, she turned to her son. "James, I know I haven't been the mother you deserve. I'm struggling, but that's no excuse for you to feel this way. We're in this together, and I want you to know I'm here for you." Tears began to stream down James' face, and Sarah saw the pain in his eyes. She was aware that it wouldn't be easy, but in that instant, there was a glimmer of hope. Paul, sensing the shift in dynamics, joined them, offering his unconditional support. The trio was about to face a new challenge, but now, together. The revelation and emotional impact of that day changed the course of Sarah's story. She had become aware that her shortcomings were not the end, but rather an opportunity for growth. The ongoing struggle for reconnection with James and Paul was becoming a path of overcoming, and the chance to rebuild her family was before her. What had once seemed like an endless abyss was now a journey of healing that they could navigate together, facing challenges with love and compassion. Sarah felt that the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The words she exchanged with James, though simple, seemed to have opened a door. She realized that her vulnerability was not a sign of weakness but a way to connect with her son. However, the sense of hope that enveloped her was not enough to erase the difficult reality she faced. In the following days, Sarah tried to focus on her new approach. She made an effort to be more present at home, but it did not come without challenges. Work continued to be a source of stress. The demands were high, and every little setback felt like a mountain. One morning, while reviewing a presentation she needed to deliver, anxiety began to creep in again. Her heart raced, and her breathing became shallow. Sarah remembered the conversation she had with James and took a deep breath. "I need to do this for myself and for them," she thought. She decided she would not let fear paralyze her. With determination, she finished the presentation and sent it off. However, when she arrived home, she found Paul looking worried. He was frustrated with work, and seeing Sarah so shaken, he asked if she was okay. The simple question made her hesitate. What should she really say? "Yes, I'm fine," she lied, but she knew the answer wasn't true. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on the past few days. The weight of expectations was accumulating, and the task of being a mother and wife, while dealing with her own emotions, felt increasingly oppressive. However, she was determined not to back down. The memory of her mother's journal echoed in her mind, and Sarah recalled how her mother had fought but also risen again. The strength her mother had shown, even amidst pain, inspired her to move forward. At school, James was also grappling with his own issues. He felt a bit more supported, but the feeling of loneliness still lingered. On a particularly difficult day, he decided to open up to a friend, sharing his insecurities and the sense that no one really cared. The friend, although well-meaning, didn't know how to help. James felt like he was speaking into a void. On his way home, he thought about how he could express himself better to his mother. He wanted her to know that he was struggling, just like she was. One night, Sarah decided it was time to talk to Paul. They sat down at the table, and after a few moments of silence, she began. "I feel like we're not communicating well. I'm trying, but sometimes I feel lost." Paul listened attentively, and so the conversation flowed. They discussed their frustrations, fears, and what they expected from each other. By the end of the talk, both felt a sense of relief. It wasn't a magical solution, but a step towards reconnection. As the weeks passed, Sarah realized that the healing journey was a continuous process. She made an effort to be more open about her emotions, not just with Paul and James, but also with friends. On a sunny afternoon, she decided to meet an old friend for coffee. During their conversation, Sarah talked about her struggles and how she was trying to be a better mother. The friend, who had also faced challenges, offered advice and support. After the conversation, Sarah felt lighter, realizing she wasn't alone in this battle. However, new obstacles arose. James began to struggle with math, and Sarah noticed that despite her efforts, he still felt insecure. She tried to help him, but quickly realized that wasn't what he needed. The pressure to be a perfect mother started to weigh on her again. In a moment of frustration, Sarah remembered her own childhood and the difficulties she had faced. She decided that instead of trying to solve everything on her own, she could seek help. With this new perspective, she signed up for a parents' group at school where she could share experiences and learn from others. Meanwhile, Paul also started to open up about his own struggles at work. They began to support each other in ways they hadn't before. Over time, their communication improved, and the tension that had once dominated the house began to dissipate. Although challenges were still present, the family's bond grew stronger. Sarah realized that even with the challenges, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The connection she was forming with her family was a significant step in the right direction. With each honest conversation and each moment of vulnerability, she was not only facing her own demons but also helping her children deal with theirs. The journey was far from easy, but Sarah now had a new perspective, and that motivated her to keep fighting. Sarah felt that the atmosphere in the room had changed. After an honest conversation with James, she realized that opening up wasn't a sign of weakness but a true way to connect with her son. This new understanding, while encouraging, didn't erase the challenges she faced. In the days that followed, she decided to focus on being more present at home, but it wasn't easy. Work continued to be a constant source of stress, and the pressure seemed to increase each day. One morning, as she reviewed a presentation she needed to deliver, anxiety began to take hold of her again. Her heart raced, and her breathing became heavy. Sarah closed her eyes and thought of James. I need to do this for myself and for my family, she thought, and decided not to let fear paralyze her. With determination, she finished the presentation and sent it off. This accomplishment, though small, brought her a slight sense of relief. When she got home, however, she found Paul with a worried look on his face. He was frustrated with work, and upon seeing Sarah so shaken, he asked if she was okay. When she heard the question, she hesitated. What should she really say? Yes, I'm fine, she lied, but she knew the answer wasn't true. This small lie made her reflect on the need to be more honest. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah pondered over the past few days. The weight of expectations was accumulating, and the task of being a mother and wife while dealing with her own emotions felt increasingly oppressive. Nevertheless, her determination not to retreat was strong. The memory of her mother's struggles echoed in her mind, and Sarah drew inspiration from the strength her mother had shown, even during difficult times. James, for his part, was also dealing with his own issues. While he felt a bit more supported, loneliness still followed him. On a particularly complicated day, he decided to talk to a friend about his insecurities. However, the friend, despite being well-meaning, didn't know how to help. On his way home, James thought about how he could express himself better to his mother, wishing she knew that he was struggling too. One night, Sarah felt it was time to talk to Paul. They sat down at the table, and after a moment of silence, she began. I feel like we're not communicating well. I'm trying, but sometimes I feel lost. Paul listened attentively, and the conversation flowed. They discussed frustrations, fears, and what they expected from each other. By the end, both felt a sense of relief. It wasn't a magical solution, but an important step towards reconnection. As the weeks went by, Sarah realized that the healing journey was ongoing. She made an effort to be more open about her emotions, not just with Paul and James, but also with friends. On a sunny afternoon, she decided to meet an old friend for coffee. During their conversation, Sarah shared her struggles and how she was trying to be a better mother. The friend, who had also faced challenges, offered advice and support. After that conversation, Sarah felt lighter, realizing she wasn't alone in this battle. However, new obstacles emerged. James began to struggle with math, and Sarah noticed that despite her efforts, he still felt insecure. When she tried to help him, she realized that wasn't what he truly needed. The pressure to be a perfect mother began to weigh on her again. In a moment of frustration, she remembered her own childhood and the difficulties she had encountered. With this new perspective, she decided that instead of trying to solve everything on her own, she could seek help. She signed up for a parents' group at school, where she could share experiences and learn from others. Paul also started to open up about his struggles at work. They began to support each other in ways they hadn't before. Over time, communication between them improved, and the tension that had once dominated the house began to dissipate. Although difficulties were still present, the family's unity grew stronger. Sarah realized that even with the challenges, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The connection she was forming with her family was a significant step. With each honest conversation and every moment of vulnerability, she was not only facing her own demons but also helping her children deal with theirs. The journey was far from easy, but Sarah now had a new perspective, and that motivated her to keep fighting. With each passing day, she felt more confident in facing whatever lay ahead. Days went by, and Sarah began to feel more assured in her new approach. However, an unexpected challenge was about to arise, testing everything she had learned about communication and vulnerability. During a school meeting, Sarah received the news that James was at risk of failing math. Her heart raced. She knew the pressure on him was immense, and the thought of her son falling behind in school worried her. On her way home, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: fear, frustration, and a slight sense of despair. The pressure she felt to be a perfect mother resurfaced with intensity. She questioned whether she had failed in her mission to be a present and attentive mother. As she entered the living room, she saw James sitting on the couch, with a distant, almost lost look. He seemed so small in that moment, and her heart ached. "James," she began, her voice trembling a little. "I heard about what happened at school. How are you feeling?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness she didn't know how to handle. "I don't know, Mom. I can't understand math. And it makes me nervous." In that instant, Sarah realized that the conversation she had always dreaded could be the key to helping her son. She remembered the talks she had with Paul and even with her friend at the cafe. Inspired, she decided she wouldn't let fear take over again. "James, I've also faced difficulties in school," she said, sitting beside him, trying to create a safe space. "I felt like that sometimes, thinking I would never learn. But I always sought help. And you know that's normal. It's normal to need support." The boy looked at her, surprised to hear his mother open up. "Do you really think I can improve?" "I know you can," Sarah affirmed confidently. "And we can do this together. How about we look for a tutor? Or even study together after school?" James hesitated, but the idea of not being alone in this battle felt comforting. "Yeah, I'd like that. But what if I still can't do it?" The question hid a deep fear, and Sarah knew she couldn't give an empty answer. "James, life is full of challenges, and we all face difficulties. What matters is how we deal with it. Sometimes we will fail, and that's okay. The important thing is that we always have the chance to start over, to try again." The conversation brought a new light to the atmosphere. James began to open up more, sharing his frustrations, and Sarah, in turn, felt stronger seeing that she was helping her son express himself. She realized that vulnerability was not a sign of weakness but a bridge to empathy and connection. That night, as they prepared for bed, a feeling of hope lingered in the air. Sarah felt closer to James than ever. Reflecting on that day, she realized she was finally applying the lessons she had learned: the importance of being honest, seeking help, and facing challenges head-on. But the real test was yet to come. The next day, when James had his first session with the tutor, nervousness overtook him. Sarah noticed he was about to give up, so before entering the room, she knelt beside him and held his hand. "Remember, my love, it's not about being perfect. It's about doing your best and not being afraid to ask for help when you need it." The session began, and Sarah waited outside, anxious. The tension was palpable. But as she heard laughter and whispers coming from inside the room, a smile formed on her face. James was opening up, asking questions, and allowing himself to make mistakes, something he had feared doing before. When the session ended, James emerged with a sparkle in his eyes. "Mom, I did it." The tutor explained everything in a way I understood. "I feel more confident now." In that moment, Sarah felt a wave of relief and joy. She had not only helped her son face a challenge, but she had also learned about the importance of allowing herself to be vulnerable. The connection they were forming was stronger than any external pressure. Sarah knew the journey was still far from perfect and that new challenges would come. But as she looked at James, she realized they could face anything together. The inner strength she had discovered was not just for herself but also to support her family. And with this new awareness, she felt ready for whatever the future held. In the days that followed the first tutoring session, Sarah and James experienced a new dynamic at home. The environment, once filled with tension and insecurity, was now filled with conversations about math, but also about feelings and daily challenges. James began to open up more, not just about school but also about his fears and dreams. Sarah noticed that this change extended beyond academics. He was becoming more confident in various areas of his life. One evening, while having dinner, James mentioned a science project he had to present at school. "Mom, I wanted to do something different, but I don't know if I can," he said, looking down at his plate. Insecurity was still present, but the way he expressed himself was different. He was willing to try. "You can always try, James. What do you have in mind?" Sarah asked, encouraging him to share his ideas. He began to talk about creating a volcano that actually worked, excitement growing as he explained his plans. Sarah smiled, seeing the passion in her son's eyes. "That's amazing. Let's research together and see how we can make it happen." In that moment, she realized that her decision to be more open and vulnerable was reverberating throughout all areas of their lives. James was learning to express his emotions in a healthier way, and she, in turn, was becoming a more conscious and present mother. On weekends, they began to set aside time to study and explore together. Sarah always brought a new game or activity that made learning fun. During one of those afternoons, she brought a math puzzle that involved solving problems to advance. As they put together the pieces, they laughed and challenged each other, creating a safe space to learn and make mistakes without fear. The results started to show. James not only improved his grades but also made new friends at school. He was becoming a happier version of himself. The pride Sarah felt was immense, but what made her happiest was seeing his confidence grow. However, it wasn't just the victories that made up this new phase. Sarah still struggled with moments of doubt, especially when comparing her journey to that of other parents. One day, while watching a mother animatedly discussing her child's successes, a feeling of insecurity washed over her. "What if I'm not doing enough?" she whispered to herself. But when she got home, she decided to talk to James about her insecurities. "You know, sometimes I feel insecure about our choices. I wonder if I'm doing enough for you," she said, sitting down beside him. James looked at her, a bit confused. "Mom, you're the best mom I could have. You always help me and listen to me." "That's what matters," he replied, with a genuine smile. His words touched Sarah's heart, and she realized that being present and willing to listen was, in fact, what mattered most. Months passed, and the bond between mother and son grew stronger. Sarah realized that her vulnerability had helped her connect with James on a deeper level. He not only trusted her but also felt safe sharing his concerns and joys. This change wasn't limited to just them. The atmosphere in their home was lighter, and even Paul noticed the difference. He praised Sarah for her new approach and the way James was thriving. One night, as they were getting ready for bed, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. Looking at James sleeping, she felt grateful. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge they faced brought them closer together. She understood that there wasn't a single path to perfect motherhood, but that love, empathy, and vulnerability were the fundamental pillars. With a serene smile, Sarah closed her eyes, feeling that, no matter what the future held, she and James would be ready to face it together. A feeling of hope and love enveloped her, and she knew that, alongside her son, she could tackle any challenge that life threw their way. As Sarah watched James asleep, a sense of peace washed over her. The journey they had shared together, from moments of insecurity to recent achievements, had been transformative. At first, James was a shy boy, filled with doubts about his abilities. But now, he was more than just a student seeking approval. He had become a curious, confident young man willing to take risks, not only in his studies but in life. The changes that took place in their home reflected a new beginning. Every conversation about math or school projects turned into opportunities for learning and emotional growth. James not only improved his grades but also began to engage in extracurricular activities, making new friends who supported and encouraged him. He had found his voice, and Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The insecurities Sarah had felt throughout the journey were now replaced by renewed confidence. She learned the importance of being vulnerable and sharing her own doubts with James. That exchange of experiences strengthened their bond, showing that no matter how challenging life could be, together they could face any situation. James's words, praising her as the best mom he could have, echoed in her mind, reminding her that love and presence were the greatest gifts she could offer. Over time, Sarah realized that true success was not just about high grades or awards, but about the emotional connection she cultivated with her son. What mattered was seeing James become the best version of himself, someone who believed in his abilities and was willing to face challenges with a smile on his face. This transformation not only brought joy to James but also filled their home with a warmth that once seemed distant. That night, with a light heart, Sarah decided it was time to celebrate their achievements. She planned a small family party to acknowledge James's progress and the journey they had taken together. With colorful balloons and a cake shaped like a volcano, she wanted him to know how valuable his accomplishments were. Seeing the joy in her son's eyes, Sarah felt that all the effort had been worth it. Life, with its twists and turns, wouldn't always be easy, but now they were better equipped to handle challenges. The love and empathy they had cultivated together became the solid foundation upon which they could build. James, with his newfound confidence, was ready to face the world, and Sarah, as a mother, was prepared to support him every step of the way. At the end of the party, as everyone laughed and celebrated, Sarah reflected on the importance of the journey they had lived. She learned that difficulties could indeed lead to unexpected growth and that every step they took together brought them even closer. The happiness she felt was not just for James's success but for the deep and meaningful relationship they had built. And now, as she invited everyone to share their own stories of overcoming and love, Sarah felt this was a moment for action. She wanted everyone to know that regardless of challenges, emotional connection and vulnerability can transform lives. Share your experiences in the comments and inspire others to embrace their journeys, she thought, because together we can create a more empathetic and supportive world. With a smile, Sarah remembered that life is made up of moments, and each one, no matter how simple it seems, has the power to change everything.